thank you, Mark, Chris, Matthew, Marianne, and Jessica for indulging me in getting together to just kind of do a little teaser maybe for the real meat of your interviews I did with all of you. Um, we are coming into this new year, and I was kind of wondering if any of you had any thoughts about how maybe the transition you went through is giving you a different start of the new year than had it been your pre-transition self. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I can go. In that I think now that I've got a focus on what I'm doing as part of my transition this year, I have a yearly theme which is guiding what I'm doing, which I wouldn't have had this time last year, because this time last year my yearly theme was, can I not be in chaos and turmoil anymore? um, so my yearly theme this year is creating margin. And so that's my focus, which I think only happens because I'm much more clear on my ikigai, I guess.
Ikigai, yeah. Mm. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I'd say the transition that I made, there's more of a self-awareness there. I now know when I'm immersing myself in tasks that are not particularly relevant, but I just enjoy as a way of distracting myself. My vice is DIY projects that are massive and unending because they're just controllable. And I decided to replace the kitchen over Christmas, but I've been acutely aware of losing hours and hours because I love it so much, and I can control it and I don't have to deal with people. But I'm like, okay, so I've managed to figure in at the start of every day, I give myself an hour or two before the dog gets up, my wife, and I sit and I've been studying my physical intelligence coaching stuff that I'm learning and, giving time to it. And I'm really proud that I do that. And I'm like, it's okay if I do the distracting stuff that I enjoy, and it's okay to go in the void, as long as I emerge and get back to the stuff that actually is going to take me places. So I've got that's my self-awareness.
I really love that idea. Actually, you've just I love that notion of like getting up super early, and like knocking out a few jobs or a few tasks, eating your frog or whatever, and then sort of starting the day. Like, I really like that as a notion. I might sort of try something like that myself. Like, I'm not officially up, so I'm not responsible for doing anything, and I don't have to be accountable, but I can get a few things done, and it feels like cheating. It feels like I've borrowed a few extra hours of the day to get some work done. I like that.
Yeah.
I think it's that kind of approach, like finding space, ways to give yourself space. And that for me, I think, has actually been one of the huge differences, is actually there is a bit of space now for me. I like before I kind of started exploring, it was all very constrained. I knew exactly what would happen, and I knew that I did not enjoy that, actually. On some that led to some deep unmet need, suffering, but that creation of space is a really interesting one. And I think for me, weirdly, I kind of do similar, but I get up at 8:30 a.m. because that's about the earliest. That's my biological equivalent of about 4:30 a.m. For most people, but I just don't book anything before midday. And I think that one of the really big differences for me is like, okay, well, what do I need? What's going to work for me?
Right.
And allowing that to be okay.
Yeah, I would agree with all the chat about making space and finding the right time. So for me, I've actually taken the rest. I've still got another week off. My client work and what that's meant is that I was able to have like a proper 2 week break at Christmas, because all the sort of other things that I need to do, all my catching up on admin and working out the kind of my vision stuff, if you like, I know I've got sort of space for it this week. And the leap for me is that, like, once upon a time I would have been like, oh well, I can't possibly be off, or if a client emails I have to get back to them. But like, I've got an out of office on. I've told people in advance I'm not about this week, and that's one thing that's sort of not on my to-do list, so that I can make space for the things that actually do really matter. And yeah, and trying to be guided by joy rather than anxiety. So it's like, I know I've got loads of financial admin to catch up on that I do not want to do, and also, like, I'm starting with, well, what are the projects and what are the things I want to launch that I know will help me have a more joyful and interesting year. And the finance admin can wait till tomorrow. Or if I do the joyful stuff first. Otherwise, I get caught in the loop of just doing the stuff that I feel like I should do and never actually get into the really important stuff. So yeah, it's all definitely a work in progress, but I wouldn't have been able to do this before, because I would have been too hung up on, like, oh no, I have to do everything, I have to get back to my clients, I can't take the time off, I'm not allowed to take time off. And now I'm like, I can take as much time off as I want, and it's great.
Freedom. Well, Jessica, any thoughts? Or
it's a little bit confusing for me, but I get the idea Matthew was talking about, not running to the rhythm of other people, and I suppose my transition allows me to go back to a place where I was not kind of having all the white noise in the head that the world injects into me before midday, with too many meetings, with too many people. So recognizing that I did have that, and that my transition will allow me to go back and reclaim that, and being more intentional about managing time is always a challenge, but being really clear about what I'm picking up and what I can put down. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but it sort of does to me.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I like the idea, Jessica, of the world injecting white noise into your mind. That's so accurate as an image.
Yeah, just builds up over time, and then yeah.
Although they say white noise is good for sleep. Maybe it puts our brains to sleep and we can't create anything useful.
Yeah, I think for me it's sort of, I've spent a lot of time, career type time, in a sort of disassociated state between mind and body. So I've actually got to make space now to, unite them. And actually that's quite shocking and alarming, to allow your body back into an embodied life. I'm inclined to operate like a brain in a bowl. So, which leads to more white noise, and the brain's quite happy in the bowl, really, if people carry it around and poke it enough, but that's not the full experience I want. So the transition is okay, well, let's allow a bit of space for an embodied experience and deal with whatever that brings up, because that's not perfect and easy by any stretch, but that's another thing.
I really I think it's so, for me, one of the really fundamental things about this is allowing consequences for things I wanted. It's like, okay, I wanted a break and I can deal with what comes up from that. Okay, I wanted to do this, I can deal with, instead of it being that idea of like, okay, well, I've done something I enjoyed and it's gone a bit wrong, or it hasn't gone quite how, and now I need a rest, and that's a problem. I think for me that's a huge thing. It's not directly the having the needs, but that the needs arise because of something I really wanted to do that doesn't have any intrinsic and any extrinsic and obvious immediate outcome. That for me is the really big thing, that and allowing myself some space for that. So yeah, Jessica, I think that's a huge thing as well. That what came up for me whilst you were speaking is this idea of the kind of noise floor of a recording. If there's a level of white noise, you can't hear the subtle stuff. You can't hear the small noises. And if you drop that noise floor, you can hear more. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? It means you can hear things that might disturb you or worry you, but it also means you can attend to more subtle things. And I think that moving in that direction where you're able to do that and where you're happy with that is a really, really great, it feels like a big part of this for me.
Yeah, it feels like we're dancing around awareness, different levels of awareness, self-awareness, mood awareness, body awareness, and caring for our awareness.
I could listen to Matthew talk about from a sensory point of view all day. It's quite eloquent on that subject. I'm wondering how much that ties in with that bodily. And we've mentioned embodiment and awareness, and how that ties in with Marianne sort of following joy, like this idea of like a joy compass or something inside the body or the head or the heart. I don't know. We've spoken about this, haven't we? The centers of intelligence, Matthew. Something going on there.
Yeah, I think this is exactly what I'm sort of working on at the minute, and in terms of something that I actually want to offer out into the world, is that like how can we make our plans? It's really to make plans based on what other people expect from us, or what we think we should be doing, or what we think success might look like. And I know for me, I have to really grapple with outdated versions of what success looks like. I went through a phase where I was binge watching a program on TV called Suits, which is all about the very corporate American lawyers, and I had this real like pang of like, oh, maybe success should be wearing a really amazing dress and heels and going into a really fancy office every day. Like that what? But it's so funny how like my brain hasn't quite caught up with, well, what does a new version of success look like? And for me, that can only be guided by joy, and that can only be the sort of physical sensation of joy, not like the theoretical thing of, oh, I think this will make me happy, but that feeling of like, when you have a really good laugh and you're like, oh, and you feel kind of that warm glow, or if you do something that feels really, it might feel quite hard but quite satisfying. So for me, I get that if I write a song, or if I talk to somebody and I feel like, oh, I've given them some insightful kind of if they've asked me for it and I give them an insightful feedback, well, whatever it might be, and it is that kind of physical sensation. So how can I be guided by the inner sense more than by that kind of like, oh well, I wear a certain thing, or I look a certain way, or I go to a certain place and everyone sees that I'm amazing. Sometimes I want that too, but a bit of both.
Yeah, I wonder, because I think a lot of us, our transitions were part of it anyway, was unlearning things that were not helpful, unlearning paradigms, unlearning expectations that we had agreed with that weren't helpful for us or for anyone else for that matter. And I think also the Marianne, what you're talking about with the joy is. I'm not sure, but I think that part of where the joy comes from is when we're really able to be ourselves without fetters. We're able to just sort of show up as who we are without having to align ourselves with expectations that we think are on us from somewhere else.
Yeah, and I definitely subscribe to the school of thought that says like your sense of joy is your best guide to to what you should be here doing in the world. Like, so something that routinely makes you feel miserable and less like yourself is not a purposeful thing for you, whatever that is. Whereas the thing that you just genuinely feel joy and you don't have to manufacture it, it's just there. Like I really believe that is the best guide to your kind of core purpose, core gifts, core thing that you can offer in the world. And it's just like finding a way to remove the obstacles to that, or to kind of make it a bigger part of your day to day. So that's certainly the journey that I feel like I'm on at the minute.
Yeah, I think awareness is a big part of that, but unlearning things is also a big part of that. Letting go of things. Mark, how do you feel? Is that it kind of seems like you're the track that you've found yourself on is related to what Marianne's talking about, this joy thing.
Maybe there are aspects of it where there are things I want to do more of that I realise that I find really fun and enjoyable. But one of the sort of things that I come back to, and as someone that historically this sort of stuff hasn't come naturally to me, because of the circles that I've moved in, I guess. I think when I find myself complaining about what I don't have access to, or what isn't working, where I'm frustrated in the business, in where I want to be, and what I'm not getting, I find that when I turn back to thinking about service and serving, and how I can be of use, and I guess purpose, then that sort of calms that voice, and sort of turns that down. So I think, it has maybe more to do with purpose than it does to do with joy. But in that, when I start to think about where I can put myself to use, and then find ways that I can do that are fun and enjoyable, then it's then just a matter of chasing, like, how can I do more of that, please?
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I'm with you, Mark, on the service thing, serving others. I think that was the thing that shifted me on the tracks, was knowing at some level that was the right thing to do, was to put myself in service of others, and for it not to just be all about me, which is, a surefire way to end up in a very dark place very quickly.
And it's weird because, like, we get told that we've got to look out for ourselves, and we've got to put our own oxygen masks on, and that is all true. But it's, I guess, sometimes it's about doing that so that we can be there for other people, and sometimes it's just because, for me, just it helps quiet that selfish. What's the other thing? The hungry ghost. It sort of kind of seems to sort of quiet that voice down when I think instead about what can I give rather than what can I get. And that sounds like I was going to say self-serving, but it's the opposite. But it's like sounds aggrandizing and sounds like you're trying to be a martyr or something. But I think, I don't know, there's something maybe not altruistic about that is, you're doing it to help yourself feel better. I tie myself in knots with that one.
I think for me, there's something really. It's about the intersection of the two things. It's about that for me. It's I somehow picked up a message that basically what I really enjoy wasn't of value to anyone else.
Yeah.
And that I could do one or the other, and that they were always in tension with one another. It was always a kind of negative sum trade-off between the two. And what I am exploring now is actually the situation that is both in service of others and that I genuinely enjoy. And that feels like the more wholesome, in a literal sense, way of approaching this stuff. Because one of them is kind of, is charity in its worst sense, is the jumping alongside someone else who's drowning, and the other one is utter self-interest at the exclusion of everything else. And I think there's something that's actually in the intersection between those two things. It's about helping ourselves and helping others at the same time. And that for me is really the exploration, and what that is when that isn't immediately available to you for whatever reason.
I really agree, and I mean it's that quote that I think we've probably all heard or seen in various places of, like, it's where your deep gladness meets the world's great need. It's exactly that intersection, but which on the face of it is quite, sounds simple, but I think can be very subtle and can be like almost a life's work to explore. Well, what is the deep gladness and what is the deep need, and how do they both go together? And I think it's that thing of, like, it has to start with self first, because if I'm not, like, solid in what I'm doing, and if I'm not enjoying it, then I don't have anything that I can transmit to others, right? But if it stops with me, then actually it won't grow, and then it won't kind of go anywhere. So I think that that intersection is exactly where the good stuff happens, but maybe it's not always easy to get there immediately.
Yeah, I think all that's exactly right on. And I find, at least for myself, that that when where my own joy is meeting the world's needs, that everything I'm giving increases. It increases in myself, and you know, the joy in me increases, and the joy in the people I'm serving increases, and what I'm giving, it doesn't follow the regular laws of physics when we're in that zone. But one thing that's a little bit interesting to me is then, if we bring creativity into the mix, I think we do use our creativity a lot to try to find where that intersection is. But at the same time, I think sometimes our creativity just takes us off on weird tangents that aren't really related to any of that sometimes, don't they? Or is it just me?
No, it's not just you.
Go ahead, Chris. I'm not
My
hearing
hand
you.
must still be up. By sorry, I lowered my hand. I didn't have anything to say for a change. Sorry, Mark. Go.
I didn't really have anything to say other than I identify with that, and also just really quickly is Chris's, your point earlier about the DIY projects. Mine aren't DIY, but they are absolutely building things on the web and stuff. Like, my buddy group keeps not making fun of me, but they keep commenting on how much I ship. And that's purely because it's something I can control and something that I can, you know, sink my time into and sink my creative energies into and know that it has an outcome. Whereas the stuff I quote unquote need to be doing while I was doing stuff this morning takes so much longer to see. It takes so much longer for it to come to fruition, if it ever will. And that's for the sort of, I don't know, the engineer mindset or whatever I have. Even the creative, like the musician, like you write a song and you can play the song and it is immediately gratifying. Whereas, you know, if I'm trying to hook up a bunch of podcast guest opportunities so I can guest on a bunch of podcasts and get my name out there, like, that is a thing that I've got to do, but it's much less gratifying and much less joyful. Yeah, anyway.
It's a real challenge, that, isn't it? If I may respond, is that okay?
Please.
It's a real challenge, isn't it? Where you've habitually got a focus for your creative energies. In this case, we've got this engineer, and that's where I go, and that's where my energy. And it's like, well, yes, but it's not necessarily always fruitful. Like, do I divide it, split it up? Do I learn to shift it over there? Because that's, I guess, what I need to. I struggle with that. I struggle.
I've really found that for me, I can't tell ahead of time why something is important. My intuition kind of guides me in that direction, and I'm attracted to it. I have no idea why. And trying to figure out why is not really that useful, actually, because I kind of have to do it to figure that out. And actually, like, stuff makes sense in retrospect. I'm like, oh, that's why I did that. Sometimes years later, that makes sense now. But asking for everything to make sense ahead of time is really, really limiting and really boring. And so actually allowing myself a few of the rabbit holes is like, eventually they kind of join up. And you're like, oh, this is interesting. But it's okay that they don't immediately. And it's okay that maybe they never do. I think there's also a huge amount of, depending on where your skills and your joys lie. I'm so interested in exploring new things and doing new things. This idea of kind of reaching a kind of excellence in any one domain is just not my interest or my skill set. I'm much more interested in doing a whole load of things and you know, being able to use that well. And that breadth of knowing a reasonable amount about a lot of things rather than a huge amount about one thing. That skill is just a different one. And actually, for me, a lot of the transition work has been to start relying on those kind of intrinsic capabilities and trusting that if I chuck myself in a new situation, I can grok it, I can get it. That's not going to be a problem, because that's what I do. And I've done it so many times before with all of the random new things that I've picked up and stopped doing, academically, professionally, hobby-wise, everything. As well as the fact that very often those things emerge as really useful. I think one of the things that comes up over and over again is explaining things to people using metaphors. And because I've done so many random things, I actually have quite a big library of weird metaphors that can be really helpful. And if nothing else, they're valuable in that.
Well, funny enough, Matthew, like what you're sharing there, and what Chris said before, and Mark's what you was like, it makes me think of a metaphor, which is that sense of like, I'm a gardener, I'm not an architect. I don't have a blueprint for what I'm building, and when I do, I get bored halfway through because I'm like, oh well, I know what it's going to look like. I don't really can't be bothered to finish it. Whereas I feel like it's like I'm scattering out all these seeds. I don't know what's going to grow. I don't know how long it's going to take. And and Chris used to think about, well, it's not fruitful. It's also like, well, I don't, we don't always know what's going to be fruitful. There's this, some random plant over there that doesn't flower for 3 years, and all of a sudden it's got some amazing flower that we wouldn't have realised if we hadn't just kind of let it be or done it in the first place. So I'm, for me, that's the most helpful way. And not everyone's the same. I don't think everyone has to be like this. But for me, that sense of like, I'm creating a garden, like, if my life is a garden, like, how can I plant the right seeds? And I don't know what's going to grow and what isn't. And it's okay not to know. And I don't know what's going to cross-fertilize and all those sorts of other lovely metaphors. And, maybe we're all the butterflies in each other's gardens.
Pollinators.
I'm taking it too far now. But anyway, you know what I'm saying.
I love that because it gives you... And I've been aware of that sort of metaphor before, but I've never really thought about it. And you put it so brilliantly there. Like, it really gives you permission to understand. Like, you can plant all these different seeds, and you don't know which ones are going to germinate, propagate. It also gives you the permission to understand that, like, weather is a thing. Weather is a thing that you can't control. And there are things outside of, and you can plan and you can do all of these things, but then suddenly there could be a blight or whatever. But it gives you the permission, or me anyway. The way that sort of speaks to me is it sort of gives me the permission to scatter those seeds and to figure out and to sort of know, okay, things might not work out all the time. There might be these issues, there might be these difficulties, and that's the weather. That's not necessarily down to bad planting. That's just the weather. And I love that.
It's hugely helpful to me, actually, Marianne. Thank you, because that idea of one of the things I've always struggled with is that I get bored at the bit many people get interested. And actually, you've helped explain a big part of that, which is once I know what I start to get bored when I know what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
And that novelty seeking, that engagement with what's emerging, rather than the perfection of some vision. And I think this is a really interesting one for transition and the new year. And this idea of it's like vision. I don't do vision. I do like a vague sense of go in that direction and see what's there. And I think that approach, and just like you said, Marianne, I think it's different people. It's absolutely fine to be different in this and have different needs and find your joy in different places. But if your joy is in this direction, it's actually, it's quite a different way of looking at the world and being in the world and working with the world.
Chris is chuckling away there in the background. Are you an architect, Chris? Is this whole idea of gardens and trees just like horrifying to you?
Well, he was talking about how he likes stuff that he can see, and
there's a pot on my hob just boiling over, and the lid's going like that when I'm hearing you lot talking about once I know what it's going to look like, I'll just leave it as is. I lose interest, and I'm just my inner perfectionist is got screaming, "No, do not leave a job unfinished! How dare you!"
That's really.
But we need people of diverse people, don't we? We need people who have the ideas and lose interest. We need people who come along and do all the heavy lifting and get the jobs finished, don't we?
Tiny amount of judgment there, Chris.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit.
I'll let him out. I'll let him have a go. He's going back in now. We're okay.
I think for me, a huge amount of this is like, what have we learned from others that how we should deal with ourselves, and like that self-punishment thing is like, I have that voice as well. I have that massive why haven't you finished? Why you need to finish? You need to do that now. And you can't do the next thing. It's like you can't go on that. And again, it's the bouncing between things. It's like I do a bit of one thing and a bit of another thing, and then I go back to the other thing instead of being finished.
Yeah, irrigating. You just go in between the different. I remember geography, irrigation.
Yeah, irrigating. Like... is it irritating?
Irrigation. Yes.
I'm probably doing both most of the time. But I think that it's such a good metaphor because you can't water a garden all at once. No. That's a flood that washes everything away. And that idea of like finishing the watering, like doing it all at once, doesn't work in this space.
I've done the garden. The garden is now done. Yeah, I've completed garden.
Jessica, it looks like you're
now under 6 feet of water. Yeah.
Let's let Jessica get in here.
It's a carousel of gardens, right? So you spin them, and some look great, some are dead. You water. I completely am with this idea of finish. Nothing is ever actually finished. It's really hard to when I actually finished something, which was part of my transition, I just literally went into shock for about 6 months, like physical, mental, everything. Shock. I cannot even vacuum the house and put the vacuum cleaner away. Like I can't do the whole. It's like I can't even finish a task. So there's this sense of carouseling tasks, and what I've had to understand is maybe rather than me work 3 times as fast as everyone else to kind of finish, I accept that it'll take me at least 3 times as long, and one thing may die along the way on my carousel of gardens, in which case it was never meant to be, which is a little bit fatalistic, but it actually allows you to kind of work through your ideas quite quickly, practice fast failure, have that experience of actually, I hated that tree anyway, it didn't suit me, it was whatever the thing was, I'm glad it's dead now, it's relieved me of that burden. So that's kind of how I do it, but which sounds similar to Matthew's, but also it looks, I'm uncertain about how that looks and features in the world generally. I don't think it's warmly received, mainly.
Probably not.
I think a lot of it's, interestingly, Mark mentioned around, there's something about output and shipping in that. An imperfection and shipping and sharing things that don't work. So that's a really big issue. And for me, it's like this idea that something has to be finished before you can share it with the world. And actually, for me, a lot of it's been joining those two things together. It's like, okay, I'm going to explore, I'm going to do a bit of that, I'm going to do a bit of this, and I'm going to share that now. That's part of the work. That's what I ship. Instead of the finished thing, because I'm never going to get to finished. I don't perceive a finishing point. I don't really, they don't make a lot of sense to me on an intrinsic level. I don't see those boundaries. I see like fuzzy, I see cycles and fuzzy edges rather than finished. So I ship it. So it's out there now. And that's the product. That's always the thing, rather than it being this idea of like getting to some arbitrary finished point. And I think for me, part of it is because it does seem it can be very unproductive. And for me, I spent a lot of time being afraid of sharing that stuff and sharing that work because it wasn't finished. It didn't have all the answers. It wasn't necessarily tidy and polished. And actually, and being told that I should be, finishing it. Actually, no, what I should have been doing is getting it out there.
That's still a real edge for me, actually. Like, I know I'm having empathy with Chris, who was freaking out earlier. This is my I get it conceptually and theoretically, but I know that's one of my biggest edges is like, I want to grow the flowers and then put them in a nice bouquet and be like, here you are, world. I don't really want to come and show you my messy garden that's still got some brambles in it and, be like, ignore that bit, here's the bit, so that's like, I totally agree with it theoretically, and emotionally it's one of the things that I find the hardest to actually do.
I think the flowers are one thing, but a lot of the stuff we're growing in the garden, how do you know when it's finished? Are my tomatoes done when they're ripe? Or are they done when someone cuts it in half and smells it and puts it in their mouth and chews it up? Are they Are they done when all the nutrients of the tomato have done their work in that person's body? And are they done
Or
when the
they've done when
plant
the
has
seeds have
died
been.
and become compost for the next year's tomato plant? I mean, there's kind of no end to it at some point.
But that cyclical thing is lovely, because some projects feed the next projects, and the things that you learn, whether it's failure or success, those are the seeds that help, germinate. Maybe they're not directly, but they go into the soil. Like, all these metaphors are working. Yeah, they absolutely go into the compost of the soil for the next thing. And yeah, so all these things that we've learned through these things that we've made, they all go into making the mulch for next things. And that's how they win. That's how they're finished, is how they fuel the next thing.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah,
You're
I was just thinking about
over
something
again.
No, he's gone back in, repressed and buried in a very healthy way. And I was thinking about something that Jessica said about that. Maybe there's something about pace and speed as well. Like there's not finishing things, but there's like I work at such a furious pace and I get so much done, and I do so much that I actually shoot myself in the foot in as much I then don't have any time to share. And the sharing is the bit that brings people in and grows your business. Like, maybe I need, maybe, I don't know.
Well, I think a big part of the whole thing too is also that in the garden, the forces that are actually making the plants and the fruit are completely mysterious and uncontrollable to us. And we can do a lot of the tending and preparing the soil and do all that kind of stuff, but the actual process of growth is both mysterious and completely out of our control. There's hands up. Go ahead, Marianne.
Yeah, well, no, I just was going to agree with you. And actually, funnily enough, I'm really late planting things in my garden this year. So I literally planted some of my spring bulb yesterday. I should have done it in November. But I think sometimes the way, like, if I think about my expectations of myself and my kind of own impatience with myself, it would be the equivalent of like, I planted some daffodils yesterday, and it would be as if I was going to go out today and be like, come on, daffodils, where are you? Like, it genuinely, I'm quite new to gardening, even though my dad's a gardener. I come from a long line of gardeners, but it was a genuine shock to be like, oh wait, you plant daffodils in November, but they don't come out until March. Like, I didn't realize that. And I think the mysterious forces include the force of time, and include the force of like a little plant being under the soil in the dark for 5 months and it looks like nothing is happening. And oh man, that's Chris's void, isn't it? That's a tough place to be in, because you're like, I can't see it, what's going on? I have to just trust that at some point this little bulb is going to shoot through the soil. So yeah, that was it really. But
or maybe yours will come up in May.
Oh, Craig, I mean, don't mess with me. I know I've planted them late, but come on, bulbs. April at least, I hope.
Matthew, were you?
No, you're right.
Matthew, were you going to say something?
I think it was really, it was more like the doing lots of things, and the idea that one comes up is quite a scary thing, but knowing that some of them are going to come up is fine. Yeah, it's that's the danger of that certain sort of kind of monomaniacal focus that I've learned how I was supposed to approach the world. And actually, like, again, the gardening metaphor is so good, because it's like, yeah, well, most of the bulbs come up brilliant, and some of them will be a bit small, and some of them come up early, and some of them come up late, and that's fine, because there are lots of them. That's actually part of it.
Then there's the bulbs like we had in one of the houses we owned. My wife planted one year, and she decided not to plant more bulbs in that area, but the flowers kept coming up every year all by themselves without us doing anything. We didn't water them. And they just, the tulips just came up every year. Yeah. So talk to me more about the control, not being in control. We've kind of talked about the outcomes. Okay, Chris, hit it.
No, I was going to say, you sure you want to bring up the C word with 15 minutes left?
The C word.
Where do
Well,
we
we've
begin?
been dancing around it for a while. We've kind of talked, people have talked about it a little bit, how, you know, in being more aware, allowing things to, being more in control so that we can actually be a little bit less in control. We've talked about that, but
there's a big thing for me around like allowing us to know the limits of a thing actually allows us to do more of it and get better at it. So we can exert more agency, more control if we allow ourselves to be limited in our control. You know, allow that that's a possibility, allow that that's a thing, and allow us to be aware that that's a thing. Because a lot of this feels like absolute control. We don't have absolute control. We can't have it. It's an illusion that to try and create that. There's no evidence for it anyway, put it that way. And there's plenty of counter evidence. But we do clearly have some influence. We can choose a lot of the direction. I think I've yet to find a more appropriately and colloquially British metaphor, but surfing is often the one that's given. I really need maybe gardening is actually just a better metaphor, more British than surfing. It's so outside of most people's experience when you hear. But that level of okay, I don't have full control, but I do have significant influence.
Yeah,
And that being true over the self as well.
Sorry, Matthew, I was just going to really step in and agree there, because I feel like I've been on a journey where, like, if I think about, like, before things changed for me, I would have thought, oh, I'm in control of, I should be in control of things, I'm in control of things. And then I think what happened for me is that the pendulum swung a little bit too far the other way, and I was like, oh, yeah, I have no agency, I'm just at the mercy and the whims of the universe, because I, felt very kind of battered about. So I guess I can share with you my metaphor for that as well if you want. I've got loads of them. But for a long time, so I felt like if you think about like a river, like for a while, I felt like I was like a piece of flotsam jetsam bit of wood being thrown along by the river, just in no control of anything. And it's like, well, no, I'm not the river, like I'm not in charge of everything, but I'm not a little bit of wood just being battered a lot, without any say. I'm kind of, I'm the captain of my ship, and I can sort of choose to sail with the tide, against the tide. I don't know what the weather's going to be like, but I think sometimes, maybe this isn't a common problem, I don't know, but sometimes it's almost like it's easy to swing too far the other way and be like, oh, I have no control, oh, the universe is just out there. And it's, especially something like COVID, for example. So how can we find the right balance? And I think it's exactly what you said. And again, back to gardening, it would be like, well, I can look really carefully at how am I nourishing the soil, how am I kind of feeding myself and my soul and everything about me, what are the seeds that I'm planting, what kind of, are they good quality, are they what I really want to grow? And then, there's loads of things outside that I can't do, and that's okay. But I agree, that's focusing my efforts on where I really can have an influence is the key.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go on.
Oh,
no, Jessica, go for it. After you.
Go, Jessica.
I was going to say, when Marianne was speaking, I think control is a word that I sort of dip out of. I can't. And when Marianne was speaking, I was thinking about attention. It's like, where do I put my attention?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just coming to the end of a particular stage of parenting. And if I'd tried to control certain stages of parenting, I think I'd have got myself into a pickle quite quickly. And it really was about where do I put my attention, and to go and just to grab the surfing metaphor. That's what I tweeted this morning. My Twitter bio says I was going to change it, but it's like whichever way the wind blows me. But I was just kind of trying to capture today. I'm going to have a huge change curve this year. And do I just kind of try to plan ahead of that, try to stay in front of it with some control, or do I just choose to surf it when it comes, because it's coming? And I put my presence, my attention will be better if I surf it, even if I'm a bad surfer, which I know I am. So for me, you have a choice about where you put your attention, and control. If anyone can never explain that word to me, please, remember that. I just can't. There's something about the word. I just go, what even is that? I don't even know.
Chris.
You picked me to it, Jessica. Yeah, the parental thing. I mean, what I was trying to pull together here is this: like, influence is a good word, Matthew, and Marion used it too. It's much better and more helpful than control. It says there are limits to it, and you can only. What was I trying to say? I'm trying to say that a really helpful, God, it's stacking metaphors here, but a really helpful thing that helped me is this idea that ideas and the things we create, that they're their own entities, and they just come through us and out into the world, and they have a life of their own. So I cannot ever hope to have any control of them. They're not mine. I'd ever own them. I was just a conduit for them, and they go out into the world and they have their own life, like children, Jessica, and having a dog's really taught me that I can't control a dog. I can just influence him, right, Marianne? And then, well, you were all talking, I was thinking, well, what if me as a work in progress, as a product, horrible word to use about myself, but what if I'm just another one of my ideas and I can only influence myself and not control myself? I don't know.
There's a very real psychological grounding to that experience, that the experiencing self, the ego, the narrative self, whatever you call it, is all thinks it's everything, and it isn't. It's that's the bit that, when we call the brain riding around, is actually it's part of something much bigger. And I think that idea that we can influence the rest of everything, of ourselves and the stuff around us, but we can't control it. Self-control is such a funny idea. That actually it becomes a working against very easily. I think that perhaps that, for me, is the fundamental thing that's easier, that's different since I started. Well, because for me, like, this idea of transition is an ongoing thing anyway. Because everything, it's like it's when did I start this ongoing transitional process, rather than when did I transition. But that is very much a shift towards working with, rather than working against. And I think, Marianne, that's kind of what you were talking about with the flow of the tide, or everything like that as well. And for me, applied to the self, it's perhaps more important than anything else. Working with what's there, with what emerges, with what comes up, rather than working against it.
Well, like, even at the level of what you were saying earlier, Matthew, about, like, your version of getting up early is 8:30, or whatever it might be. Like, even just at that small micro level of, like, well, what are my rhythms? What are my natural ways of being in the world? Like, am I going to pretend to myself that I'm someone other than I'm not? And am I going to try and work in a way that doesn't suit me because it seems to work for other people? Going with the flow of our own natural instincts, preferences, all these things.
It almost sounds like what we're saying is that self-control is actually a myth. And when we think we're self-controlling, or when we're trying to control ourselves, it's that we're imposing rules and boundaries and things from the outside somewhere in ways that are constricting and cutting off life, rather than actually helping anything. It kind of sounds like that's what we're saying.
I'd say we're using an approach that isn't appropriate for the thing that we're trying to work with. We're approaching it as a kind of mechanical system, as a complicated system, when we're dealing with a complex system instead.
Chris, you're welcome to just jump in whenever you want to. Now you're muted, so whatever you're saying, we're not getting.
No. I know. I'll jump in whenever I can. That's part of the problem. I've left my hand up by accident again. Sorry.
Because it looked like you were brooding over there. So,
yeah. Just letting go of control a little bit more. I think that's probably what that face was.
Or is it just resting, brooding face? Is that
Yes.
Mark, do you have any thoughts on what we're talking about right now? Control or influence, or?
I feel like so many, but they'd be slightly disparate, which is why I pushed the microphone away, because if I didn't do that, I'd keep just jumping in, because and I'm glad that I didn't, because that I've really appreciated this, and I love that. Like I popped in the chat, like this notion, as as I'm sure many people do, thinking about the new year, thinking about the promises we make to ourselves, or not necessarily resolutions, but things that we want to try and commit to. And self-control is often something that feels like that's a thing, that's one of the things in the mix. And I love this idea of self-influence rather than self-control. And yeah, like when you were talking about control earlier, I was thinking about exertion as in exerting pressure on a thing, and what that can do, and how that's that changes something in a way that perhaps you don't want it to be changed, and maybe irrevocably. You're exerting pressure on something rather than guiding, nudging, influencing. I think that's really interesting, and much kinder as well.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead, Marianne.
Sorry, I've gone a bit. I can't stop with the metaphors. It's an addiction. It just makes
got
me
another
think,
one for us.
I've got another one. Well, it just came to me based on what Mark was just saying there. Like talking about, it's almost like think about how powerful a glacier is and how kind of slow it is, versus like I feel like I'm often trying to hammer my life into shape, and actually that doesn't generally work. But that there's something about the gentleness and the patience of influence versus control.
It's back to gardening again. It's tending. You're tending to things. You're not, and it's like the other thing that resonated with me is this thing of, I'm really conscious of now at the moment is these planting in November, and it maybe not bearing fruit until March, and that specific thing of it's under the ground, probably doing a thing. Maybe not, but you have to just hope, and you can't keep digging up the soil to check that it's still alive. You have to just trust in yourself that you've put the work in, and the soil's right, and you've bought the right seeds and all that kind of stuff, that it will bear fruit, or it will come up. It doesn't have to bear fruit yet, but it will. You will see the shoots, and that's huge. That is huge for me. As much as I'm realizing now, I'm a gardener. Because I think I probably thought of myself more as an architect, but I am a gardener. But I've been a gardener who absolutely just demands results straight away, and yeah, I think maybe I haven't been the gardener. Maybe I've been the estate owner who's demanding of the gardener, like, you planted these things 5 minutes ago. Why haven't they borne fruit yet? And that's pinging all sorts of things in my head. Like, part of what I have to do sometimes is just wait. And now I've got a metaphor for why that is important. And why that inaction is not necessarily inaction. What, you know what I mean? Why that inaction is not inertia? Why not taking action is a good thing? Why letting something, giving it time to germinate, giving it time to
patience and observing and
Yeah.
And relaxing into the seasons is actually activity.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's conscious. It's done with intent. It may be not action, but it's done with intent, and that's that's a helpful thing.
Any final words that if you don't say it now, you're gonna hate yourself for the rest of your life? Jessica, you have a.
I was lost in my own thoughts. Which is that if it is in the material world, I will fuck it up. So just leave it alone. And this is true. And I'm not. This is a huge realization that I've been coming to. I can't do with all this crap behind me. It's like it's there, it's fine. But if I try it too much, I'll cut myself. I'll fall over. I'll spend too much money. Whatever. The material world can do one. I will wander in it. I will enjoy it, but I don't want. I'm not in charge of it.
Jessica, I sent a text to my friend today, and it ended with me saying I hate meat space, because the physical world, I went outside into the world today. That world can fuck off. This world is lovely. This world is great, and I can be helpful and effective and useful within it. No, all that stuff can go away. I want none of it.
I'm so glad to have met you, Mark. And Chris, when you said how good you were with building things, I was like secretly so envious. I was just like, Jesus Christ, that man has skills. So we need everybody, because I can't do this on my own.
Yes.
Like people who are practical that help me through.
That's it. Yep.
How do we capture all this wisdom? Because I'm looking at my notes here, and it's like an angsty teenager's little memoir journal. I've written influence/control with/against. What if I'm just another one of my ideas?
Oh wow! Yeah, man, that's a real doozy.
Yeah.
I'm copying and pasting the chat into a notes document because I'm hoping that will jog some of my memory of some of the things we've talked about. But it might be useful, Craig, if you don't mind sharing the recording for us at some point.
I'm happy to do that. In fact, I intend to share it not only with the 5 of you, but also with the 2 people who were not able to come. So, yeah, I will definitely do that. In fact, if Chris is willing, I might even be able to give the transcript. He's been transcripting.
That's a yes.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah.
Good work.
Yeah, he's been listening to them and dutifully typing them.
Every word.
Okay, I need to get going to another thing. This was good. Thank you all very much. This is interesting. I think I want to try to have more conversations sort of along these lines in the future. We'll see how things unfold, as it were. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for inviting me in. Yeah, bringing it all together. It's great.
Yeah, thank you.
And good luck with the project as well.
Thank you. We'll see what the project actually is. I'm not actually sure. I'm in a major pivot right now. So
major pivot.
Just keep pivoting. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, that's what ballet is, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did we measure the emergence levels?
I get motion sick very easily. So
oh no! I just tried to pivot, but sorry, go on.
Okay, peace out, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks all.
Bye.